Back in the winter of 2021, I was working as a late-night inventory manager for a 6-story commercial building downtown. The upper floors belonged to various law firms and tech startups, while the basement housed a massive storage warehouse. My job was to haul heavy crates of office supplies, furniture, and archives up to the respective floors between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. The building was nearly a century old, meaning the main freight elevator was an ancient, rattling industrial lift. It had heavy metal mesh scissor gates that you had to pull shut by hand before the cab would move, moving with a slow, grinding mechanical groan. Around 2:30 a.m., I loaded a pallet jack with 5 large cardboard boxes destined for a law firm on the 5th floor. The building was entirely vacant, lit only by dim security lights scattered down the long, linoleum hallways. I rolled the load into the freight elevator, pulled the inner scissor gate shut with a heavy metallic clatter, and pressed the button for floor 5. The lift lurked into motion, shuddering slowly upward through the dark elevator shaft. As the lift passed the 3rd floor, the overhead strip light inside the cab flickered violently, died for a second, and then buzzed back on. That's when the elevator gave a sudden, sickening jolt and ground to a complete halt between the 3rd and 4th floors. I groaned, assuming the old motor had tripped a breaker again. I reached for the emergency call box on the wall panel to dial the building's maintenance line. Before I could pick up the receiver, I heard a faint, deliberate sound coming from above me in the shaft. Clink, clink, clink. It sounded like heavy metal tools scraping against the steel cables directly above the ceiling of the elevator cab. I froze, pulling my head back to stare up at the emergency escape hatch in the cab's ceiling. I figured maybe an overnight elevator mechanic had been dispatched without my knowledge, but nobody was supposed to be in the building without checking in with me first. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing up the narrow shaft. "Is someone up there? I'm trapped in the lift." The scraping sound stopped instantly. The silence inside the enclosed shaft became suffocating. Then, slowly, the heavy metal trapdoor on the elevator ceiling began to lift upward. A gap opened in the square panel. Through the dim light of the shaft, I saw a pair of thick, filthy work boots dangling down into the cab, followed by the lower half of a man squeezing his way through the small hatch. He dropped onto the top of one of my cardboard boxes with a heavy, dull thud. He was wearing a grease-stained canvas jumpsuit, but his entire face was completely concealed under a dark, heavy welding mask with the visor flipped down. In his gloved right hand, he was gripping a massive pair of heavy steel cable cutters. My blood turned to ice water. I backed up against the rear wall of the elevator cab, pressing myself flat against the metal siding. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my heart hammering like a war drum against my ribs. He didn't speak. He slowly raised the cable cutters, aimed them at the heavy rubber power cord that fed electricity to the elevator's interior lights and control panel, and clamped down hard. Snip. The lift dropped into pitch blackness. The sound of the electrical snap rang out in the tiny space, followed immediately by the sound of him stepping off the cardboard box onto the floor of the cab, just feet away from where I was standing. Panic completely overtook me. I didn't try to fight him in the dark. I reached out blindly, grabbed the handle of the manual scissor gate, and shoved it back with all my strength. The gap between the elevator cab and the concrete wall of the elevator shaft was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Because we were stuck between floors, the concrete floor ledge of the 4th floor entrance was roughly waist-high in front of the open gate. I threw myself head first through the narrow opening, scrambling onto the cold tile floor of the dark fourth-floor hallway, just as a heavy hand grabbed the heel of my boot, pulling violently backward. I kicked frantically with my free leg, striking his wrist until his grip slipped. I scrambled to my feet, sprinted down the dark hallway to the fire exit stairs, and flew down 4 flights of steps into the lobby, bursting out the front doors into the freezing night air. I ran 2 blocks down the street before finding a late-night diner and calling the police. When deputies arrived to sweep the building, they found the freight elevator still stuck between floors, the power line severed, and the emergency hatch wide open. The man was gone, having climbed up the elevator cables to the roof exit. When they checked the roof, they found a stash of food, blankets, and a duffel bag full of heavy tools hidden near the HVAC units. The suspect had been squatting on the roof of the commercial building for almost 2 weeks, hiding in the service shaft at night. I submitted my resignation the following morning. I still get a wave of pure claustrophobia every time I step into an elevator, and I always check the ceiling panel before the doors close.